boys and girls. Today, before we get into doing more with expressions, I want to talk about some properties of our operations. I've mentioned them in class, but I want to go to them more in detail right now. So what we have is the property of operations, right? Or the properties. There's more than one. Okay, there's actually four that we're going to talk about. There's a commutative property, the associative property, the distributive property, and then finally the identity property. Okay, so in this graphic here, you see that I have them listed out, and we're going to start with the commutative property. Now, the commutative property happens for both addition and multiplication. And what you have to remember with the commutative property is the word commute. Okay, now I don't know if you ride a bus, if you ride a bike, if you ride with your parents to school or whoever, or friends, you take a certain route. That's your commute to school. And it doesn't matter what route you take to get from the house to school, the end result is you're going to get to school, okay? And when you go home, the same thing. You're going to get to the house. So that's the way the commutative property works in addition and multiplication. You can change the order of each one of the problems, or the terms rather, and it doesn't matter. You'll get the same result. So 3 plus 7 is 10. 7 plus 3 is 10. I changed the order of the addends, but I've still got the same result. Same thing for multiplication. 2 times 3 is 6. Well, 3 times 2 is also 6. I changed the order, but it came out to the same answer. So that's the commutative property of multiplication and division. Multiplication and addition. There's also the associative property of both addition and multiplication. Now, the key word here is associate. All right? Who you associate, who you hang around with. You have friends. Doesn't matter who you hang around with, y'all are all still friends. So here's an example I'm going to use. I have Dion, Charlos, and Richard. They're all friends. Dion can hang out with Charlos, but he's still friends with Richard. Richard can hang out with Dion, but he's still friends with Charlos, and so forth. You can change the way you're grouped, but in the end, y'all are still friends. Okay? So let me show you a real quick example of the associative property. So I have 2 plus 3 plus 5. I could say 2 plus 3 is 5 plus 5 equals 10. In this first problem, the 2 and the 3 were hanging out together, and the 5 was kind of off doing something else. In this one, the 2 is by itself, and the 3 and the 5 are together. So according to PEMDAS, I do the 3 plus 5 first, which is 8. 2 plus 8 is 10. And that's how it works. Same thing applies for multiplication. Let's also look at a real quick multiplication example. We'll use the same numbers. 2 times 3 times 5. Okay, I can group the 2 times 3. 2 times 3 is 6 times 5. 6 times 5 is 30. 30 is my final answer. If I say 2 times 3 times 5 and group the 3 and the 5 together, 3 times 5 is 15. 2 times 15 is 30. Does not matter the order, we get the exact same answer. Okay, so next we have the distributive property. Now the distributive property can be a little tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's not that hard. So what the distributive property says is that if you multiply a number by a sum or a difference, it's the same thing as multiplying by each number in the sum or the difference, and then just adding or subtracting them together. Okay, so let me give you a real quick example. So I have 6 times 2 plus 4. All right, so I can go ahead and do this problem and get 2 times 4, or 2 plus 4 is 6. And I have 6 times 6 is 36. All right, so what the distributive property says is I can multiply. Let me go ahead and rewrite this. I can multiply the 2 times the 6, and then also multiply the 6 times the 4. All right, 6 times 2 is 12, plus 6 times 4 is 24. So my answer is 12 plus 24, which is 36. Okay, let's look at a difference real quick as well. All right, so I have 8 times 5 minus 3. If I go ahead and solve it like this, I have 8 times 5 minus 3 is 2, and I wind up with 16. All right, so if I use the distributive property, I multiply 8 times 5 and get 40, and then 8 times 3 is 24. If I subtract 24 from 40, guess what? I get 16, okay? That's the distributive property. I distribute the 8 to each one of the numbers in either the difference or the sum. Okay, the last property that I want to talk about is the identity property, and that's pretty easy, okay? For addition, the identity property says that any number that I add, or if I ever add 0 to a number, I always get that number. That works with any number in the world. It's called the identity property of addition. The identity property of multiplication says if I multiply any number times 1, I get that number. And that's pretty much it.